city. If it can conceivably trip you up, it's in here. We're going to be distracted, but do keep your eyes on the ground as well. We don't want any accident. Come with me, we'll take this side street. You have a different accent. Where is it from? You've travelled a lot?
Yes, indeed.
Because I heard you speak, I heard you say a couple of things earlier on. There's a different tone behind your... Obviously, people always notice that I have an accent when I speak in Spanish as well.
Where are you from?
From the south of England.
South of England?
Yeah.
How long have you been here?
In this country, I'm coming up to 27 years.
Okay, so
yeah.
I guess you're staying.
Yeah, maybe just for a little bit longer.
Oh, not forever?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't
We'll
know.
see. Probably. I'm too lazy to move anywhere else.
Takes a lot of effort.
Families were spending was going into a lot of the very decorative materials, the very expensive materials, the granites, the marbles, the bronze works, the stained glass.
When did the Eloise Hotel close across the street?
The one across the street was called Étoile.
Étoile, yeah.
Whereas I've had, we're stopping here.
So it's like a total street.
Yeah.
It's a little village of tombstones.
That one was trying to break out.
They're breaking out.
Not tombstones, mausoleums. Incredible.
They changed her photograph. That lady there, she had. You can still see it there. That's a very 80s jacket and trousers. The photograph they had in there before always reminded me of that TV program. One of you asked me a question a couple of minutes ago. Can you re-ask me the question at a volume where everyone else can hear?
Oh, why some of them are in such disrepair.
Right. So we've all seen evidence of that on our walk here, and one of the reasons why I take that route is keep you away from people, and you can see the extremes in terms of the differences in upkeep or lack of in the museum. Today we're in a situation where 40% of the mausoleums in this cemetery are abandoned. The root cause of this really comes from back in the day, from the 1880s, when these very rich establishment families were beginning to buy up plots in here to make these very big investments in these structures we're looking at today. Realising that these were very rich establishment families, military, political, old money, commercial families, and they were going to be making big commitments in here, they were originally sold their plots on perpetual contracts, meaning that literally they bought them forever, whatever the concept of forever really is. Over the years and generations, that's become a big problem because families move away, they die out, or for whatever reason haven't kept up with them, and they've fallen into the varying states of disrepair that we've seen today. And they've never really been able to foreclose on them or take them off them because the perpetual contracts are still in force. They did change the law back in 2014, Law 4977. If I wanted to buy a mausoleum in here today, things are a little different. Let's say, for example, I wanted to buy the little grey one we were looking at a few minutes ago. That family would have to completely empty that mausoleum out. This has always been the case. You've never been able to buy a mausoleum with human remains inside. You can't sublet or divide, whatever. If I wanted to buy that mausoleum, it probably cost me around about $43,000 to $45,000. The difference under the 2014 law is that that family, the current owners, would have to relinquish the perpetual contract. And I would only be able to buy it in here on a lease basis today. So I'm never going to own it outright. 99-year lease, lots of rules, regulations and things attached to that. Is that going to solve the problem they already have? Not necessarily. Is it going to prevent it from becoming a much bigger problem in the future? Hopefully, yes. They also passed a decree through government last year that they can now begin to actually foreclose or take mausoleums. Standing foundation for the rest of the tour. It's a young girl called Rufina Cambaceres, as you can clearly see for yourselves. On the 31st of May 1902, she was celebrating her 19th birthday. She's a girl who suffered from a condition called catatonic epilepsy. And as she was getting ready for the evening out with her mother, she basically suffered an epileptic fit and was left unconscious, or so her mother thought. But upon checking Rufina, really did not detect any signs of life and suspected that maybe, just maybe, her young daughter had passed away, knowing that that condition was waiting to kill the sufferer. She was also fully aware of the fact that it can make it very difficult to detect signs of life, hence its own title, catatonic epilepsy, of course. So she called in 3 separate independent doctors, each of whom examined Rufina, agreed with the mother that she had passed away, her death certificate was signed, and she was sealed into a casket, first one of those metallic caskets we mentioned a number of minutes ago, and then a wooden casket, just like others we've seen so far. This particular mausoleum here on the corner, of course, did not exist at the time. The one just right next door to it, just right behind me, well, that one did. It's the same family name up there, Mercedes, and that's where she was initially laid to rest. However, on the evening of her burial, security had heard some strange goings on in this general area. Didn't really think an awful lot of it. Cats in the cemetery or the wind could pick up, all sorts of things could make noise through the night. But knowing that Rufina had been buried with a lot of very expensive jewellery, which was not necessarily uncommon back in the day, they decided to alert the family really more as a precaution than anything else, who came quite promptly the next day, checked the mausoleum, it seemed fine. When they went inside, one thing they saw just very slightly out of place was the outer wooden lid on her casket. So they began to investigate a little further. And of course, just like us suspecting the worst, they requested to have the whole thing reopened. As soon as they saw Rufina, it was very clear and evident from the light, but yes, bruising on the back of her hands, forearms and face, that she had been the one making the noise. They had ended up burying her alive, but it was way too late by the time they got back, so she'd expired many hours beforehand in the sealed casket next door. Her mother, despite her extra precautions, understandably was devastated. She commissioned this mausoleum to be built that we're looking at today. It's all crafted in Italian C1 Carrara marble, in this particular case by a German sculptor, a man called Richard Eigner. We start at the very top of it. We're going to decipher it top down. Got the rather wonderfully crafted irises up there with the pattern work, the cloud cover, the rays of the sun, 3 little cherubs, and then of course it brings us down to her name once more. And then this rather wonderful sculpture of her as she would have looked at that time. What we can also observe is the bronze door here just behind her. Now evidently her right hand once upon a time was crafted to rest upon that door's handle, which for some reason is actually no longer there. But even if the door handle were there, that was never designed to actually physically open or close, of course. It's purely symbolic. She's here on the outside of the mausoleum, on the outside of the door, obviously due to the circumstances. We're going to go to our next mausoleum of interest, but before we move away completely, make sure you have a look in the side door there. Well, if we're in transition, we don't know whether it's going to work or not. We're hoping it will work. In the year 1970, at the young age of 25, she had just got married, and along with her new husband flew off to Innsbruck in Austria. The idea was they were going to have a little bit of a skiing holiday, stroke honeymoon, into one. Now, unfortunately, whilst in the hotel up in the mountains, they were caught out by a massive avalanche. It made world news back in the day. Large parts of their hotel collapsed. Her husband, he rather miraculously survived the whole affair, but Liliana herself did not. Her remains, however, were recovered and repatriated, and it was her parents who designed and commissioned this mausoleum we're looking at today. Evidently, overall, it's contemporary Gothic in its style. It was rather controversial at the time, not really in keeping with the more classical or conservative styles we've seen thus far, but yes, very representative of the church where she'd been married here in the city not too long beforehand. What we can also see, and of course what would initially draw your eye to this, is the wonderful bronze work here. This was crafted by a man called Wilfredo Hidalgo. He actually crafted it from two separate photographs that he had been given by the family. Photograph of Liliana for her wedding day, hence her attire here with the long gown, bow on her slippers, very prominent wedding ring on her finger, and also a photograph of Sable, her pet dog and loyal friend. And he brought the two together in this work completed a couple of years later in 1972. Today, Liliana herself is in the second vault, or pretty down. She's quite deep down. But I like to pick this guy out sometimes. It's reasonably interesting. His name is Domingo Faustino Sarmiento. He was born all the way back in the year 1811, and his presidency here in the country was 1868 to 74. He's remembered for a whole number of different things, but the one thing he's really remembered for more than anything else is when he stood up in the House as president and he declared that every child in the country, no matter what their economic means may be, has the right to an education, and as a result, not just of his speech, but of course his government's policies, politics and practices they put in place, state schooling started here in Argentina, and it actually remains in place even today, albeit dysfunction in many areas due to lack of public funding. But I think that would be the same story for all of us back home. He's affectionately known as the father of education. He passed away on the 11th of September in the year 1888. And ever since that time, each and every year, the 11th of September has been and is celebrated as Teachers' Day in the country, celebrating teachers, educators, education as a whole, and of course commemorating who they consider to be the father of their education, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento. The mausoleum we've come in to have a look at is this black mausoleum just on the left here. It's where Evita lies at rest today. Eva Peron, Evita, same person. We're going to be talking about her, but I'm not going to do it here because the whole world and his dog comes to this passageway. A, I don't want hangers on, and B, I don't want to be unfair and block it for other people for the length of time it's going to take you to talk about her.
Yeah.
So we're here to have a look and grab a photograph and move on. What I will mention is at the top it says Familia Duarte. It's her maiden name from her illegitimate father's side of the family. This is a mausoleum that was never built for or intended for Evita. The reasons for this will become clear.
Qu'est-ce qu'on peut voir ici? Ça,
She wasn't placed in here until 24 years after her death. She's similar to the girl up the road. She's deep down underground, about 15 feet down. A little bit out underneath the pathway as you walk by. Lots of different plaques. Any of them say Eva or Evita. It's the person we're going to be talking about. We're going to try and hide away from everyone else and do it on our own. You come down into the shade when you're ready. We'll catch a bit of a breeze every now and again coming through here.
Okay. Right.
Persistent, to say the least. Let's go a little bit further down the passageway. So you're still in the shade.
Okay.
Come down stand in the sun, come into the shade. I want you to be comfortable. I want to be able to deliver what I want to tell you without being distracted, because I've got a lot of information to give you now.
Okay.
And what I mentioned to you earlier on, I'm always open to questions, but hold off on them for the next few minutes until I finish this bit, because it's quite intense and you'll put me off and then I'll lose where I was and this, that, and the other. Let me ask you first, what do you know about Evita? We just went to see her mausoleum.
I wouldn't want to be your enemy.
Why would that? Why? That's interesting.
I think some of her enemies disappeared.
Not sure about that. The disappeared and what you're talking about was a little bit later on. I mean, you know, this is politics. I mean, anything's possible.
She was very young when she died,
Yeah.
cancer.
From poor upbringings, sort of the Hollywood story, you know, poor girl meets rich older general.
She really made her husband too. She really thought he was great. She
Yeah,
worked
until
for
now,
him.
she's appreciated and she really, you know, gets
Sorry, I
people.
couldn't hear you.
Nowadays, she's highly appreciated by all the Argentinians, and she really helped the people.
Well, we've got
Themselves, and she really did.
Mm.
You know, that's history.
People have different views as well. But,
It appeared as
yeah.
though she one for the poor, two for me.
Very well.
Yeah, I'm not commenting much on this because what I want to clarify here is Simon does not do political tours. And Evita is a very political and controversial figure.
Yes.
I'm going to cover that a little bit more, but you know, I think we've got a good idea who she was. Let's start at the beginning and we'll end at the end. Evita herself was born on the 7th of May in the year 1919. She was the illegitimate daughter of a very wealthy man, a rancher called Juan Duarte. Duarte is the name we just saw in that mausoleum. She was very reluctantly recognized as his daughter, at the same time very much rejected from that side of the family, and was literally given no other option but to grow up in extreme poverty in her mother's single-parent home, way off out in the countryside. It was at the age of 15 Evita decided to leave the countryside and come to Buenos Aires, the big city, the bright lights, in search of fame and fortune. She was quite successful as an actress. She also worked within the realms of radio and other bits and pieces, and became a household name, you know, a celebrity within the city, the country, and no doubt beyond. In the year 1944, there was a massive earthquake northwest of the country in an area called San Juan. 20,000 people lost their lives, but there were many who survived, but of course were victims, and they needed help and aid. And a one-off evening charity event was set up here in the city in a place called Luna Park. Evita was invited to that event, let's say as a guest of honour, but the guest of honour, headliner for the evening, was a man called Juan Domingo Perón. Well, that's where they met for the first time. They must have got along quite well, because a year later in 45 they were married, and in 1946 Perón himself became president of the country. Evita, by default, First Lady. She never held official office in government, but it's very clear to everybody, even today, she was pulling more than just one or two strings behind Perón's presidency, and in some areas was probably running things more than he was. Their time together was very short, we're going to come to that in a moment, but also very controversial and remains so today. I think we've already established that. Again, I'll remind you, this is not a political talk, but if we were to go out there into the city, the country or beyond, some of the people we talk to, they would have a view of, yes, Evita was wonderful, helped workers, the poor, women's rights, etc. They wouldn't hear a word against her. As far as they're concerned, she's still Saint Evita, and they hold her up on a pedestal as such. But of course, other people would have a very different, far more scathing or damning opinion of her and Perón, and about what they were really up to. And many of them would go along the lines of them using super socialist Peronist politics as a bit of a smokescreen or a facade, whilst they fleeced the population of the country of its wealth at the same time. Even in this group we had those different opposing views. Doesn't matter what you might think about Evita, she herself, very sadly, very unfairly, unjustly passed away at the young age of 33 from cancer of the uterus, and that was on the 26th of July 1952. Now, the idea following her passing was to lay her in state over what people thought would be a relatively shortish period of time, because they estimated anywhere between 150, possibly up to 200,000 people who might like to file by and pay their last respects to Evita. Well, they got that wrong, because it was way over 2 million, and it was a number of weeks before Perón actually got Evita's body back. But when he did, it was under his very clear instruction that her body was to be further preserved by a Spanish physician, a man called Pedro Ada. Now, the reason why Perón had specifically chosen him was because Pedro Ada was a pioneer in the use of glycerin to preserve bodies. Glycerin, unlike formaldehyde, would not only preserve a body along with a cocktail of other chemicals, but it's a much thicker, more viscous substance. It would act as a filler, and it would help reverse the very detrimental effects that long-term cancer and subsequently death had upon Evita's appearance, because it refills everything back out again. But it is a very long, slow, drawn-out, meticulous process. It can literally take years to complete. It was in the third year of Pedro Ada still doing touch-ups on Evita's body, Perón was overthrown by the military. He's kicked out of office, he's kicked out of the country, and he actually goes to live in Barcelona in Spain. At the same time, the military stole Evita's body, no doubt to prevent any of his or her supporters from being able to use her politically to their own advantage, and consequently to the detriment of the military themselves. Their initial attempts of trying to hide her in and around Buenos Aires were pretty futile. People were patching up and finding out exactly where Evita was very quickly. As far as the military is concerned, this was a security issue for them, so they ended up smuggling her body out of the country altogether. And she was flown off over to Italy and ended up in a cemetery not dissimilar to this one, called Il Monumentale in Milan in Italy. And she was secreted away in a crypt there for the next 17 years. I don't expect you to keep up with all of Simon's years and dates and everything else, but if we do add everything together, it brings us to 1972. Perón, he's still living in Spain. He's married to his third wife, Isabel, now, and he's got quite a good life going on over there, but he's absolutely determined to get back here for the 1973 elections. Age-wise, it will be his last opportunity to do so, because he's in his late 70s. He's literally putting out all stops to try and find out where Evita is, because he knows if he can recover Evita's body and transmit that information here, it will guarantee him back in, and the presidency. And that's exactly what he did. And he became president for the last time in September 1973. But he actually passed away just a few months later on the 1st of July 1974. Now, in this case, his third wife Isabel was First Lady and Vice President, so she immediately took over from him. That was her first task, to take over his presidency. Her second was to bury Perón. Well, there was a state funeral. He was buried in Recoleta Cemetary, way off on the other side of the city. The third thing that was decided for her to do was to repatriate Evita's body, because Perón had recovered Evita's body, but he'd left her on a dining room table in the house in Spain. Evita's body was placed obviously into an aeroplane. She was flown here, and initially, when Evita's body arrived back, everyone was rather elated and saying, "Oh, wonderful, we've got Evita's body back." But then the next thing was they were all looking rather blank-faced, scratching their heads and saying, "Yeah, but now what do we do with her?" Because nothing had ever been set up for Evita. As a temporary measure, her body was transported a few miles north out of the city to an estate called Olivos, the official presidential residence. That's where Isabel was living, and that's where they were going to place Evita's body whilst they sorted out what they were going to do with her. However, on the 24th of March 1976, the military, led at that time by a man called Jorge, overthrew Isabel Perón, suffered the same fate as her deceased husband had all that time before her. That's when the last military dictatorship started in this country, one we very often refer to as the Dirty War. As far as Evita's placement was concerned, this didn't initially affect her, because Jorge had insisted that he did not want to move into Olivos. He said, "No, my barracks and my men are on the other side of the city. I want to be out there with them." However, a few months into his dictatorship presidency, whichever you prefer to refer to it as, it was decided that he needs to move into Olivos. I think you can imagine what his wife's response was to that prospect, with Evita's dead body still in Olivos. She said, "I'm not going. You need to relocate her, otherwise you're living with dead lady rather than one who's alive. So it was a bit of a rush job. And it was on the 26th of October, 1976, an army vehicle was sent to pick up Evita's body. She was brought here to Recoleta. She didn't come through the main entrance that we came through today. There's a little black side door. And at 10 to 6 in the afternoon, she was placed into the pre-existing Duarte family's mausoleum, which is the one we've had a look at today. Remember what I said at the very beginning? A mausoleum that was never built for and never intended for Evita. It was just literally to get her out of the way as quickly as possible. That's where she is today. Now you can see why I... And we're heading to possibly the most valuable cemetery in terms of function value. And it's the one with the really big dome coming up ahead of us to the right there. It belongs to a family called the Leloir family. Franco-Swiss in origin. They hold their plot back to the 40s. They have a fortune on it. One of the main features, of course, we can see from here is the large dome on the top. It's a large copper, bronze, grey granite dome. And its underside it features a hand-laid tesseract tile mosaic, which will become clear as you get closer to it. Literally thousands upon thousands of little square ceramic tiles that have all been crafted in gold leaf. There's an interior dome which is also crafted in gold leaf, as are other elements and details on the inside. Coming back to the outside, at the base of the columns on each corner are representations of urns. Look a bit like oversized Fabergé eggs. Those are made from bronze and rhodochrosite. Rhodochrosite, known locally as the Inca rose, is a national stone here in Argentina. It's a semi-precious pink mineral. It's mined mainly northwest of the country in an area called Catamarca, and actually starts off life as a stalagmite. Don't let anybody here fool you into thinking or believing that the only place you can get rhodochrosite is here. Because if they're trying to sell it to you, then they very often do that, and it's not true. It's the state mineral in Colorado, for example. You guys would know it as rose quartz back home. You can get it in Zimbabwe, the former Rhodesia, which is possibly where it got its name from, and other places around the world. I'm sure there are variations in it, but essentially it's the same. The most well-remembered member of the Leloir family today is a man called Federico Leloir. Back in the year 1970, he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And it was for certain advances work research that he and his lab team had worked on towards a possible future cure for lactose intolerance. We know there still isn't a cure for that particular condition even today, but a lot of what we know about it came from his work at that time. And it makes him one of just 5 Nobel Prize winners in the country today, 2 of which are in this cemetery. This guy here and a man called Saavedra Lammers, Nobel Peace Prize, 1936. When you come over and have a look, one thing you must make sure you do is observe that first little bit of a step there. Come over and have a look in the door though, so you can see what's going on. Like the first little step. How to get a bit of a funny angle? Known as the Wild Bull of Las Pampas. His career was 100 years ago now, back in the 20s. The pinnacle of his career was on one particular evening. It was on the 14th of September 1923. He was in a big stadium called Polo Grounds in New York City, and he was about to fight for the world heavyweight title belt. If I remind you, it's 23. Any idea who he might be fighting for the championship belt?
23.
No? 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 A man called Jack Dempsey.
Oh.
You'll recognise the name wherever you're from,
right.
but yeah. I mean, it's 100 years ago now, so I'm not surprised that no one got it. Occasionally, sometimes someone does, so I always like to give you the opportunity. Jack Dempsey, the Manassas Mauler, he was from a small town called Manassas, southwest out of Denver, in Colorado. This went down as the fight of the century, but really for all of the wrong reasons. In the first round, third ball here, he caught a hell of a hook on Dempsey, and he knocked him flying backwards out of the ring. Dempsey was out of the ring, according to the referee's count, for a count of 14. However, many who were there at the time and have done ever since protested quite strongly and said to the referee, that count should have been much longer. You left a very long pause before you started it. The referee himself, a man called Johnny Gallagher, he admitted to a little bit of a pause, but maybe not the one that other people were referring to. That wasn't the main problem. The main problem was also there were many people who were there present on the evening, and they had a very clear view of everything that was going on in the ring, ringside and everything else, because they paid to go and see the fight. They claimed they'd seen Jack Dempsey being held back into the ring. That's instant disqualification, no questions asked. The referee himself said, unfortunately, I was a few steps back from the side of the ring. I couldn't see what was going on over to the side of the ring, and unfortunately for you guys, the rules of this game are I'm the referee. If I didn't see it occur, then it didn't happen. I have no choice but to allow the fight to continue, and that's exactly what he did. Went into the second round, and the 57th second of the second round, Philippe here goes back down on the mat again. I'm stressing again because this is the 7th time that Dempsey had knocked him down. It doesn't make any difference. He should still have got the fairness of a count to get back up and continue fighting. The referee wasn't taking that chance. Called a technical knockout on him and ensured that Jack Dempsey retained the world heavyweight title belt, despite having lost it in the first round, depending on who you speak to. Backroom boys, yeah, definitely. He was a big guy. This is to scale. This is a wonderful work by a man called Luis Polotti and Juan Ferraro. It was completed in 1966 and placed here to adorn his mausoleum. That's in fact 6 years after he passed away. He died in 1960, age 65. We're going to do, just in case you're wondering about timings and everything, we're going to do one up there on the corner. We're going to make our way back up again and do a couple of bits and pieces on the way. It's all the way up at the entrance.
Oh, all the way up there?
Yeah.
Not this way?
No, it's right up where we started.
Okay.
Those signs aren't very clear. Supposed to be a ship.
Oh, I love it.
So we're looking at like the bow of the ship. Despite the size of this is a Lamas Caselas family, so it was a big native guy. It's tiny inside. When you open the door there, it's just literally a parapet. His wife Sally was already passed, and she's just in this sort of like alcove at an angle. I saw a tour guide there with blonde hair just now, with two people and a microphone and a speaker. I mean, what's the point? What's the point? We're just briefly looking at this one here because this is actually one of the very first people that I mentioned to you. It was His name is Brigadier General Martin Rodriguez. We're literally back where we started because the entrance is just up the road there. You've probably worked it out from across over there. So we've done full circle physically, geographically, we're back where we started. We'll start this year. 17th of November. Seems like a lot of them around because there's a lot to it. We've seen some stuff, but there's a lot more that probably you would see if you'd have to come in 1,000 times to see it all. What I wanted to achieve with you, we've done, guys. So if anybody needs to ask me anything, then feel free to do so before you disappear.